What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to another Fall Obsession podcast episode. My name is Sam Thrash, and I'm your show host over here at Fall Obsession. This week, I'm podcasting with a returning guest to our show, Mike Behrens, good friend of mine I've gotten to know past couple years down here in Texas, and conveniently lives in very close proximity to me. But Mike has 15 acres that he gets to hunt. That's right here, his own property, and had a really big building year when it comes to learning some things about hunting whitetails, about bow hunting, and several other things. So him and I sit down, we have a great conversation about all those things: archery, whitetail, hogs, Texas, small properties. It's all in there, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode. I always enjoy getting to sit down with Mike and just diving deep into some of the topics that we get into. So it's always a good time. Hope you guys enjoy it. But before we get there, Fall Obsession Podcast is sponsored by Hoot Camo. If you guys haven't checked out Hoot Camo yet, I encourage you guys to do so. They are a Texas-based company. They make their own camouflage gear and patterns. But don't let the Texas thing discourage you. They work everywhere. We currently have Fall Obsession team members from all over the country repping and using the Hoot gear. And I myself wore it for the first time this past season in both Texas and Flatland, Colorado, and it worked wonders for me. I probably would have not have had as good of a chance as I did at the mule deer that I ended up killing this year in Colorado if it wasn't for my Hoot gear, and I'm not lying about that. I'm dead serious. So if you guys haven't checked out Hoot Camo, please go do so. They take pride in manufacturing and making gear that is on par with the industry leaders in camouflage and hunting gear, but at a price point that's realistic for the blue collar guy if you're looking to get into a good set of camouflage. And if you go to their website, you look at their prices, you will see that for a good quality set of camouflage, it is very reasonable. So hootcamo.com, go check them out. And if you're going to place an order, no matter how big or small, use the code FALLOBSESSION15 at checkout, and that's going to save you guys some money on that order. So Hoot Camo, go check them out. Ridge Rock Hunt Company is another partner of the podcast. Derek and Lacey over there in Mississippi. They book hunts with vetted outfitters across the country. Derek has a large network of trusted outfitters that he sets his clients up with, and he can do that for you too. So if you're looking to book that next hunt, that next adventure, maybe even a once-in-a-lifetime bucket list hunt that you've been saving up for, give Derek a call. He'll work with you on all the details and find something that's right for you. Ridge Rock Hunt Company, go check him out. Last partner I got for you guys is the Outdoor Call radio app. Outdoors Dan from Respect the Game TV. He has created an app for hunters and outdoorsmen that you guys can stream on any device, and it play hunting shows and podcasts on a loop every single day. You'll catch Fall Obsession podcast playing on that loop on Mondays, the same day as our new publication, as well as tons of other hunting shows and podcasts that we all know and love. So go download the Outdoor Call radio app today and start streaming, and go follow Outdoors Dan on social media. He does a couple of live broadcasts at local Midwest radio stations a couple times a week, and he streams those broadcasts on his Facebook Live if you're not local to those stations. So you can catch those broadcasts on there, and it's always some good conversation that he has with some guests that he has on the show in the industry. So the Outdoor Call radio app, go check it out. Last thing I'll say before we go over to the episode is if you guys represent or work for your own organization or brand in the hunting industry, and you guys might be interested in promoting your brand on this podcast during this sponsor segment, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk to you. Go to fallobsession.com/podcast. There's a form that you guys can fill out on that page that'll put you in touch with myself and our production team, and we'll talk details, we'll talk analytics, and what it looks like getting you guys plugged in as a Fall Obsession podcast partner. So if you're interested, go to fallobsession.com/podcast. That's all I got for you guys. We're going over to the episode and our conversation with Mike. You guys are listening to another Fall Obsession podcast.
Oh, you got her, dude. She's down.
Let's go.
Dude, I just shot a deer of a lifetime.
Freaking smoked him.
One with nature, and if you're a believer, one with God.
Definitely gets your heart pumping. Boy, you are in trouble.
Fall Obsession Podcast.
All right, everybody, we're back for another Fall Obsession podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Sam. I'm hosting you guys this week, and I'm joined by a returning guest to our show, Mike Behrens from down here in Texas. Welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. We've recorded several episodes together at this point, and I think it was probably a little over a year ago we recorded your first one on the show, 136. And unfortunately, the title, I remember the number, but the title slips my mind.
First year for everything.
First year for everything. You got it. There we go. But yeah, we knocked that one out, kind of covering your first year of whitetail hunting, bow hunting, down here in Texas and everything, and the adventures that went with that. And here we are a little over a year later, doing it again, basically. And I think you've referred to this phase that you've been in this year as the sophomore slump.
Yeah,
is a term that you've used. But
been a letdown from the highs last year. So.
Well, you started on a very high note last year for sure with that Joker out back, but that was a stud.
Tried to replicate, but it didn't pan out. They didn't cooperate.
Yeah. So I know last year you had. Because you have 15 acres that you own yourself, and then last year you also had a deer lease in addition to that.
Right.
This year things shrunk. This year that deer lease went away for various reasons.
Correct.
And you threw everything you had basically into the backyard.
Yep.
And I know if listeners, viewers are tuning in, having been with us for a while, and recall your first podcast with us, they may remember some of the stuff you talked about as far as what you have going on back there and some of the deer that you have back there. But you yourself just mentioned high note to end the year last year. What were the expectations going into this year, given the deer that you saw last year?
Well, I didn't get a lot of a chance to get the guys last year. I mean, we had that one that I'd shown you a picture of, and I think that was actually on the thumbnail from last year's episode. That big muscular dude standing next to the feeder. So he showed up after I tagged out. So that was sweet.
That's always how it works.
Yeah, love it. So we were done with bucks, and then these guys start showing up in late December and everything. So I went into this year not really caring about archery only per se. It was hot. Every time you go out there, it's 95 degrees. By the time you walk out to the ground blind or deer stand or the tree stand or anything, you reek like a dirty gym sock.
Yeah.
By the time you get out there, and it's like, okay, well, what are we doing? Because they're going to smell me 500 yards away anyway. So I didn't really care about October.
Yeah, I rode off most. I think I hunted one time, like for a few days in October toward the beginning,
3,
just because it was beginning of bow season and I wanted to get out there. But I get that the deer got to move at some point, and especially if the moon's in your favor, you even in the warm temps, you can make some stuff work potentially depending on what your deer are doing. I just don't like being, to your point, I don't like being hot.
No.
And so I ended up writing off pretty much the rest of the month and focused on November myself as well. So I'm right there with you. Texas in the summer, as most southern areas, is not ideal.
Well, and there was one weekend where the weather did cooperate. It actually got down, in the 50s or something.
Yeah,
it was like a cold rain, given what we had all summer, 110, 112. So, that one weekend, I think it was the 20th and 21st, it was, it was overcast, it was pretty windy, 50 degrees and rainy. So, I'm like, okay, cool. I can actually get out there and not stink this time. So, I went out that weekend, and this was actually at the deer lease. There was another one, a buddy of mine. He had stumbled on one, essentially, and they had some goobers out there that nobody wanted to waste a tag on. So I got one of the goobers.
There you go.
But he was miserable, and I guess if you want to start off on the slump stories right away, this is the one. So. This was my introduction to the world's worst archery shot, and I didn't understand why or how it happened. On the run up to it, you and I had been out back on my property shooting at 60, 70 yards, and I didn't have the greatest arrows ever, but playing the wind ride, I was still hitting somewhere near the dinner plate, so I knew I was good at 40.
Yeah.
And given the range that I was at with this guy, I was somewhere mid-20s. you know, and so it was a close-up shot, and he was right there. I'm like, okay, this is easy. And you saw what I did at 40. I was hitting close.
No,
I mean, I sure wasn't missing by...
You've put in the time on the range for sure,
right,
to be proficient with your bow. So,
and that's you know, just kind of setting the table for everybody on why, you know, I was pretty confident going out there with the bow this year, even though it's, you know, this would have only been my second animal I've ever taken with a bow.
Right.
So by no means an expert, but I sure was not uncomfortable this year like I was last year.
Right.
So, and yeah, I don't know if that was my downfall maybe, but yeah, so I get out there and this guy comes in and, you know, good looking buck. He's just got that funky rack, you know, and I showed you pictures of him too. He's weird looking, but unique,
yeah,
all the same. So I'm keeping his Euro mount, and so I get him in sights, and I got that new single pin, so I'm super comfortable with it, really liking how everything's set up. And I let loose the arrow, and I wasn't high, I wasn't left, I wasn't right, I didn't jerk, everything was smooth. I saw the lighted knock take off, and that's when I got concerned, because I didn't do anything abnormal. But I see this lighted knock, and that orange blaze is just going towards the right. And that's not at all where I was aiming.
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out I missed this deer. Well, I didn't miss him. I hit him through the femur, broke his leg right there with the broadhead, and he drops down, then he gets up and he's limping away. And I'm like, what do I do?
What just happened?
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, it had to be something, because it wasn't me. That was my initial thought. I was like, you know, and, well, the initial thought was, what did I do wrong? And then I thought about it, you know, and this all takes place, you know, 10 minutes worth of thinking takes place in like 2 seconds.
You question everything in that moment, and you're analyzing everything and second guessing yourself. And yeah, I've been there.
And it wasn't even like I had a moment of panic, because he just got up. He's like, oh man, that hurt. Can't use my leg. I'm just going to go away now. So he was just walking away, and there was like one of the spotted fawns was walking next to him, I guess giving him encouragement or something. So, you know, I'm like, okay, that's pretty awful. Great. So I knock another arrow. Now this is where that inexperience comes in. Take your quiver with you.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah.
So I knock another arrow. I walk out. And I wanted to get ahead of him, because I knew he was hurt and I knew he wasn't going to be running anywhere. So I wanted to get ahead. So I took a wide berth around and got ahead of him and started pushing back. I walked right past him, like literally 4 feet away. He was bedded down in some thicket and I couldn't see him. So I walked right past him, and now I'm like, okay, well, I didn't see him at all. So I did another sweep and I went further out and came back. And I knew I had him contained. You know, it wasn't like he had escaped anywhere. I mean, I had him contained. I knew. So now it was just a matter of finding out where he bedded down. So I started going through all the thick stuff and everything. Sure enough, right next to that first path that I had walked, he was right there. And he's looking at me. So now I'm thinking, okay, does this qualify as a hunt anymore, or is this a euthanasia? You know, because after that whole hog experience I had over the summer, I didn't go out there without a sidearm anymore.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, do I do that? Or, you know, because I couldn't get an arrow through that because there were so many vines and everything, and it was just awful. And he's looking at me, he's like, dude, just hurry up. You know, he just had that look on his face, like, just get it over with. And I was trying, but I couldn't get, you know, I couldn't get it through the front where I could have gotten a chest shot on him. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe the other side's open and I can sneak around and get him from the rear quarter. Well, as soon as I got in position back there, he gets up and he starts walking away. Now, mind you, I'm not 100% familiar with this area at this point, you know, because this is something that's brand new to the guy that brought me out there. So, at any rate, so this deer gets up and he walks and he ends up falling down a ravine. And it's like 10-foot walls on every side. And I was like, sweet.
Of course, yeah.
So this is where it's going to happen. So I get down there, and of course, you know, he's laying down completely, you know, 6 o'clock facing me, so there's no shot there. So I had to climb down the ravine, go around, get a side shot from him. And finally, he saw me coming, and he ended up getting up, and he just kind of faced a little bit. And second arrow, no issue whatsoever, went right into the breadbasket.
Right on the money. Yeah.
So that was the first one now, and the worst part about that was where he actually decided to end it.
Yeah, because now you got to get them out of that
Yeah.
10-foot drop. Yeah. Sharing a story like that in the public eye, it's not something that is very common on hunting platforms, like what Fall Obsession has. And I don't want our we've had a lot of stories this year about kind of the ugly side of bow hunting or deer hunting in general. And I don't want our listeners by any means to think that we're trying to normalize this or anything.
No.
But what it comes down to, and I've said this before on our podcast, is if you've hunted for any significant amount of time, you've made a bad shot.
Yep.
You've experienced you've had stuff like this happen. You've had an animal that would not die.
Right.
And that's challenging, as you are well aware. And it's the reason we share it on this platform, and that we don't shy away from these kind of stories or try to cover them up with the happy-go-lucky stuff.
Yeah, everything's perfect.
It's just because we're blue-collar hunters and outdoorsmen just like the rest of everybody out here. There's nothing special about us, and just because we have a podcast doesn't mean that we don't have problems. So
there was something wrong with that, and I did a lot of research on it too, just to try and figure out exactly why. And that's the other key component too. If you have a bad shot, figure out why, so it doesn't happen again, or at least you can mitigate the chances of it happening again.
So let's talk about that. So you get your deer killed, you get your deer out of there, tags punched, but as an archer, where's your head at?
I'm putting it away.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to do that to another animal.
Right.
And I think I told you that right away. I was like, I'm done with the bow until I figure out what happened.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know if it was an arrow issue. I did a lot of the research on it and everything, and I thought I had it narrowed down. There was no way to test it because the arrow was broke. So it was the broadhead. I did recover the broadhead, but it was in the opposite leg is where it actually broke off. So it broke off an inch of the shaft. So there was no way to test it to see if it was the arrow, if it was an oscillation issue, but that's what everything was pointed to. So basically what I'm assuming happened, and I might be right, I might be wrong, but with the way the arrow oscillates and goes through, for some reason, there was something that happened in those conditions at that moment to where the shaft was still bent out and the tail was closer to, the frame of the bow, and I have a whisker biscuit, so the frame of the whisker biscuit too. So if everything didn't work perfectly there, I clipped with the rear end. I clipped that whisker biscuit.
Whisker biscuits, we got to get you out of that at some point, because that's one of my least favorite arrow rests.
Yep.
And I get that they do serve a purpose for the entry level archer, and I'm even looking at my son's bow that's sitting over here on the floor, and it's got a whisker biscuit on it, but it serves a purpose. But as far as accuracy and consistency goes, that's where the problem is, just because there's so much contact.
Right.
So much contact on that arrow.
And as far as a rest goes, the rest falls away. Now there's nothing for it to hit on the way out. On a whisker biscuit, you've got that plastic ring all the way around. So it's bound to happen. So my assumption is that's what happened, because I can't think of another. And you saw me shoot that actual arrow, and it wasn't doing that. That might have been one of the ones that was slightly off, but that was at 40 yards.
It could have been that. It could have been. I'm more inclined to think that if you're confident in your shot and everything felt right, I know from just my background in working in an archery shop, I've seen it where an arrow that sits down in the whisker biscuit, it gets maybe pressed down to one side or the other, like into the whiskers a little too much, especially if you're in the blind and you just bump that shaft before you draw back. You bump it on something and don't even realize it because you're focused on your deer. That can easily cause it to do that, and that might have been all it took for something like that to happen. But
at any rate, I'm convinced it was something mechanical and not something fundamental. So
it's easy to question your fundamentals for sure. and not saying that it couldn't have been, but I've seen you shoot. I trust you in your opinion because I know how thorough you are, and in the past year and a half you've asked all the right questions and you've applied all the right things to your archery brain and everything, and I've seen you improve as an archer, and yeah, you're taking strides far above other people as far as, you know, how deep you've gone into it to make yourself better, you know. So
and I wouldn't use it if I wasn't at that point. You know, it's just like last year, I wasn't going to use it until I was 100% confident. That's why when I got off work, got home at 7:30 in the morning, I was out there until 8 o'clock shooting.
Yeah.
And then I would put it up, and, you know, gradually over that, you know, 2-3 months on the run up to September, where I had to start like really tuning it in, I was comfortable on what I could do out to 50.
Yeah.
And I knew that was double what my range was in the backyard. So yeah, it was just that one thing. I mean, that was the 6th deer that I had taken since I started. And let's see, well, and not all of those. I mean, there was only 2 that were archery. The other 4 were rifle. And then 5 or 6 pigs last year with the rifle. And the first 10 kills were all clean, very quick, no issue. So, you know, it was kind of the expectation too. You're just like, wait, that didn't go the way it was supposed to.
Yeah.
What is this? So, I'm like, hold on, let's do over.
Yeah. Rewind a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty frustrating, but at the same time, I mean, you know, it was not for the deer. I mean, that's a whole other issue, but, you know, as far as mentally, it really slapped me back to reality, kind of, you know, because I mean, you said it too. I mean, I was riding a pretty good wave last year.
Oh, yeah.
Like with everything. I mean, it's like everything I touched, it went down, and it was just there at the right time, and like everything worked. And then this year, it was not great. And that started off the season, and that was October 21st. So I'm just like, okay, well, we got 2.5 months left, so this is gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
If this is how it goes.
Before we get any deeper, tell me about your single pin, because you transitioned to that and you mentioned it briefly earlier. What are your thoughts on that? So,
if anybody had watched the questions about archery one that we did.
Yeah, we did. I'm trying to think of all the ones that we've done, because we did an archery related podcast, and I don't even remember which one that is. I'd have to go back and look. I think it was in the 140s maybe. And then we did 2 back-to-back. I know that.
Yeah, that was like, what, 51 and 52?
I think it was 49, 149 and 150. Okay. We did one over hunting as conservation.
Yeah.
During which we talked about, we got a little bit more controversial than we typically do on this podcast, but it was a great conversation. And then 150 was, man, just on a whim. Hey, let's just talk about camo.
Yeah, that was just random.
That's all we did was talk about camo. And as it turns out, and this is just a side note since I have you sitting here, and I've told you this before, but in 2023, episode 150, that one that we did on a whim about camo, that was the most listened to Fall Obsession podcast episode on Spotify in 202023. Somehow.
Which is funny because it's just a random.
We didn't even know what we were going to talk about before we hit record. So sometimes those unscripted ones are the best.
Which is funny too, because I spent the last 2 weeks, ever since you started talking about getting me over here again, I spent the last 2 weeks scouring Amazon for the little plastic number ones and everything. And I had this whole thing planned out where I was going to have the big chain with the number 1 on it, number 1 sunglasses, and I was going to wear the Star Spangled Cowboy hat and then put a big plastic number 1 on it and be like, man, I had no idea. What a shock. Never saw that coming. And just putting all this stuff on as you're telling me.
Man, I wish you did.
But I couldn't find all the plastic. I mean, all the plastic that comes out of China, and you can't get some number 1s for me.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, that was the plan, but I ran out of time. Couldn't find it.
That's okay. Next time. We'll do something fun next time. But anyway, your single pin.
So the single pin, like that, like I said on that archery episode last year, for my tiny little, flatline infantry brain, the single pin works like a rifle with iron sights. Mm-hmm. So it makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
And instantly more comfortable. I mean, just the first day I put it on. I mean, I was very meticulous about mounting it, because I was setting it up and just kind of, lacing the screws in just a little bit just to see where it was at. And then I would take it off and I would put the other sight back on, because that's where the pins were actually accurate and they were leveled for me, and everything. So I was like, okay, cool. So I need to put it right here. And then I put that back on, and I got this thing. It's almost like bore sighting a rifle, but I did it with a bow, and I didn't have a bow press. So that was awesome.
Well, you don't need a bow press for your sight.
Well, no, but just something to hold it. I was doing this like just resting it on a table and stuff. It's just how I did get stuff done.
Yeah.
Wing it. So I got this thing pretty close to where it was actually at, and turns out when I shot that 10-yard shot just to test it, it was almost dead center.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, cool. This is going to be a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So I started working my way back to the 60, just like the directions said. And, by the time I get back to 60, let's rewind to last August. My shot group at 50 with the 5-pin sight that it came with was about yay big. Okay. I was cool with that, not bad, but that's kind of where it was. Sometimes it was a little tighter, sometimes a little bigger, but that was about the average. Just a small dinner plate. Yeah. So I was pretty cool with that. Given the equipment, it was all stock from the store. I'm like, yeah, great. So I get back to 60, and I put 3 arrows at 60 into the target. They were that big.
Yeah. Golf ball.
And I was a little bit excited about it, maybe irrationally so. Sent you a picture.
Yep.
So I was like, okay, this is the deal. So I was instantly comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And I knew I would be, but I mean, it was good that it was validated with the actual hands-on. But yeah, that single pin for me personally is where it's at, because I'm not gonna, like, you've got yours set up where you can change your elevation on it, and every pin is set 10 yards apart, or however you have it set up and all that stuff.
I changed mine up this year. I went with a 2-pin, which works the same way as a single pin. You just have 2 pins and 2 sight tape indicators, basically. So just like you would range something at 62 yards and you turn that single pin to 62, well, if I range something at 62, I turn it to 62, and my first indicator is at 62 for the top pin, but then my bottom indicator might be at, 74. And so now I have a pin gap in between the two to shoot anything in between 62 and 74, and I know that's a wide range for a lot of archers and everything, and that's the part that even I'm not as comfortable with. I mean, I've shot my pin gap, I understand it, but it changes.
Yeah,
it changes with ranges, because when I'm up closer, it's more narrow. If I get farther away, it's a wider pin gap. So especially when you start getting longer, I don't use it as much. It's more meant for, like, if I'm bow hunting in Texas, sub 30 yards, I can put, feeders at 25. I put that on 25, and I got a 25 to 32 yard range right there, that I can shoot in my pin gap. And as long as you practice with your pin gaps, that works well. To your point, I had a 5-pin with a floater on the bottom last year, so 20 through 60 set, and I'm shooting pin gaps in between. So I understand how, especially with your background, like you mentioned, how that single pin is going to benefit you a lot more.
And it did, and it's something, for people who come from a rifle background that want to get into archery. I actually talked to a guy at work about the exact same thing. And I was like, well, I mean, I told him this flat out. It was actually last night. I said, well, I mean, if you're wanting to get a bow, you're a prior service Marine. You're rifle bred, so it's going to make sense to you.
Yeah.
So I would just go ahead and do that right away and just get comfortable with it from jump, instead of, okay, now I understand a 5-pin. Now, I'm going to do this anyway.
Right.
So, and it's kind of like building a rifle. Instead of going and buying a stock AR from, wherever, and then coming back and spending $800 on furniture for it, why don't you just build it with the furniture you want from the get-go?
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing that I told him. I was like, if you're going to do it, you're a gun guy. You're a Marine, you're a cop, all that stuff. I mean, it's all the same things. So just do the single pin. You're going to not regret it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, for me, it was amazing. Yeah. Loved it. And I tried so hard to get a pig with it, but they would not cooperate. Just would not do it.
That's how it goes.
They were showing up, man. Somebody gave them my work schedule. Because it was like every single night that I was off, I'd sit out there and see nothing. And then the night I go back to work, and all of a sudden, camera's going nuts. And there's 40 pigs out there. Every single week it was like that.
That sucks.
So,
well, you get your first deer of the year out of the way, and the adventure that was.
Yes.
What followed after that?
it was a massive drought. So there was, well, in this year too, there was a lot of stuff, and not to get too personal about anything, but with the medical issues, with my wife and everything, that kind of, it definitely limited her ability to get out there. And we had spent some money on the crossbow equipment and stuff because we didn't want her bruising from a rifle, and she couldn't draw back a bow or anything like that. So it was, let's do the crossbow. So, we spent the money on that and got her situated, and that was like, if you can get out there, then I want you out there, and I want you to be able to use that. So, and it served its purpose a little bit. She got out there a couple of times, but the amount of times that she went out last year versus this year was just night and day.
Oh yeah.
And then even when she was out there, it wasn't enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a good season for her to be out there, unfortunately.
So, and then, by default with that, there's other stuff that needs to get done too. So my free time was severely limited versus what it was last year. I mean, it was like almost every weekend I was gone last year. And this year, the deer, I think they forgot who I was. Because they're like last year, they'd see me, hear me come in, and it was just normal.
Yeah.
And this year it wasn't normal. And there were other noise issues going on too that didn't help things, that were external.
Yeah.
I think I told you there was a lot of noise coming from the west end a couple of times, and then the planes, they've got pilots, and apparently deer season is the time when all the pilots come out and start learning how to fly over our house. So bunch of just unique situations we had no control over. So. There was a lot of things that came together and did not work in my favor. So November was, for me, it was pretty uneventful, and I really just spent a lot of time just studying things back there, because the whole thing, I mean, and I kind of alluded to this last year too, like I had more fun hunting the pigs and going after pigs than I did deer. It's like, I don't know, they're not predictable, whereas deer, they're somewhat predictable, kind of what their patterns are. You can pattern them a lot easier. With pigs, you can't do that. So I spent a lot of time in November just studying the pigs and seeing when they were showing up and what the weather conditions were, because that was the one thing I wasn't connecting. I wasn't putting together what they were doing with the wind. And once I figured out, because back there where I have everything set up, it's all valleys in between these hills. I mean, it rolls down into these water cuts and everything, and that's where they're traveling through. But that's also, regardless of the wind direction, that's where the scent is settling in too.
Right, exactly.
So I had to figure all that out, and where they were coming from, how far the water cuts traveled, and things like that. So right now, just a gross indicator is what direction the wind is, obviously. So if it's blowing out of the north, I'm not going to see those pigs for a long time. And the second it turns and it starts blowing out of the south, within 24 hours I'll have pigs on that feeder. And that's like clockwork. You can set your watch to it. So, which leads me into this next few days. May have one. So we'll see. Or I may have accidentally trapped a whole bunch of piglets, because there's about 20 of them back there now too, little stripies. So total population, since there hasn't been any of them taken out that I know of, our total population of pigs back there right now is probably in the vicinity of 55 to 60. That's a lot of pigs for that little timber.
Yeah, it is for sure. And I mean, you butt up to fields and your neighbor's timber and that kind of stuff too. But
Right.
yes, it is in comparison to other places, it's a small area to hold that many pigs. So.
And it's all enclosed too, because if you zoom out on the aerial map, I mean, you've got the county road that goes all the way around up towards Cottondale and everything, and it's all encased. And there's residences on the outskirts of everything, except for the northeast corner where that's all ranchers. So, yeah, I mean, it's not a lot of room, but when that wind blows out of the north, they're all out of the north end. And when it blows from the south, they all come down, and they're thankfully not going on Terry's ranch anymore and tearing up his feed shedded like they did last time. That was nice. But yeah, so that was my November and early December, and it was kind of just, I mean, it was really just fighting, whether it was the weather or whether it was the situation or whatever. It was just battling all that.
So you had different variables, but this whole time, even though you have other stuff going on, you're watching everything.
Yes.
So what are you seeing as far as deer, as comparing this year to last year?
Well, I'm seeing everything that I want to go after.
Yeah.
But every time I did get a chance to go out, they were no-showing me. And it was kind of like that last year too. And I mean, wind-wise, I was typically never really downwind from them. I wasn't necessarily upwind either. It was more of a cross, but I mean, they'd come in from any direction, so it didn't matter. They'd get you one way or another. So it got to a point where I really didn't even bother if it was super windy, because I didn't want the scent to carry. If it was relatively calm, then I would make a point to try and get out there at least once that day. Yeah. But I did see there was a lot of does back there, which was something I was concerned about last year, because I thought we only had a couple of them running around, and then one got hit by a car, and I was like, oh my God, we're gonna, but that's only a concern that hunters have. Nobody else shares that concern about deer. But yeah, I mean, I was seeing a lot of doe out there. The fawns were sticking close. I mean, especially when I moved my feeder and everything back after I'd talked to one of the neighbors, and and that kind of ties in with the whole pig thing. It was basically hey, do what you want on my side of the property line back there. You can do whatever you want as long as you keep the pigs away from the house. Yeah. Deal. So, I guess mission accomplished on that. I hadn't actually killed any yet because they know my work schedule. But anyway, yeah, so I'm seeing all kinds of does. I'm seeing some of the big boys. I've got this 8-pointer that, we wanted to let grow along with the 6-pointer he runs around with, and I think you caught a glimpse of him a couple of times. Yeah. Decent looking, but you can tell he's a drought deer. Give him another year. We'll see what he comes back as next year. Hopefully it's a 10 and a 8 or a 10 and a 9 or something like that with those two. Yeah. A good generational future for the next several years too, because there's quite a few young bucks that, I mean, I'm not confident enough to say it was a 3.5-year-old buck. It just didn't look that big, but it had an 8-point rack already. Yeah. And he was little. So maybe a 1.5, I don't know. Probably a 2.5, probably most likely.
Back there, yeah.
But yeah, 2.5 with 8 points, that's something that I didn't think I'd see back there. But they've also been eating protein too for the first time.
You're 2 seasons now into feeding them better stuff.
And you can tell the difference. Yep. You can tell the difference. So, and they're more comfortable coming in, but the ones that I wanted to come in, that I wanted to get the area rid of so these guys could grow into the area, they just weren't showing up. Yeah. I mean, they were showing up like crazy last year, but they were not coming in this year at all. They didn't feed, they didn't do anything. So, last year I had that 10-pointer, and I had Demon, which somebody got him this year. I'm confident somebody got him because I have not seen him at all. Yeah. And there were probably 3 or 4 strangers that I had never seen before that started showing up. That big wide 6-pointer, he came back. He was an 8-pointer, really wide still, very distinctive. So yeah, the gang was back. Yeah. They just were very cagey this year. So it took a little bit longer to get anything done, but I wasn't going to take a doe out of the backyard because, initially I thought we only had, just that handful, and then the babies that were going to grow into the area. So I wasn't going to take any does. And I figured even after I saw that group of 8, I was like, I'll probably just leave this alone. I'll wait until next year and worry about that. So no does this year. And I wasn't even going to ask on, on my buddy's place out there. So, because they had their hands full with hunters and they had a hard time bringing stuff in too. So I wasn't going to ask. I mean, I got that gift of the first one, so I'll leave that alone. But he ended up getting a couple of good ones out there, him and his wife. So they were happy. So yeah, I mean, I was just kind of watching and, letting the frustration mount, and then getting into the point towards Christmas where I'm like, man, I'm running out of time. I ain't going to finish this out. So I got to the point of, almost giving up, where I'm just like going out there just to do the motions and not thinking. And, so I go out there. It was like, no, I wasn't even out there. This was on trail cam. And it was like December 19th, 18th and 19th, both mornings, and one evening out of those days. I can't remember exactly which, but this big, tall, he wasn't goofy looking, but he was one of those two. And I couldn't tell if it was Demon or that December thumbnail picture deer that it was. I couldn't tell which one it was, but I was like, that's got to be him, because his body is way bigger than that 8-pointer.
He was... you sent me pictures. He was visually just a much more mature deer than you had anything else back there. Like, this is, without a shadow of a doubt, in my opinion, a 5-year-old at least.
Yeah.
Like, this is a shooter.
So I was seeing him on the trail cam, and I'm like, all right, so that guy, and then there was another one, because the 4.5-year-old that we were watching all year, he had even height brow tines. And then there was another one where the right brow tine, or the left brow tine, was like 4 inches longer than the right brow tine. But other than that, they almost looked identical. So I'm like, okay, well, if that dude shows up, I'll take him, or the other one. I don't care which, I mean, at this point. So either one would have been a gift that I would have willingly taken. So I was like, all right, let's see who shows up. And of course, the only ones that I'm seeing every single time I'm out there are the 6-pointer and the 8-pointer that I'm saving. So I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Because that whole thing, don't pass on something that you'd take on your last day, all that stuff. But had it in my head, I was not going to take that one. And he left, and then nothing until the 18th and 19th. I see this dude coming in. I'm like, all right, cool. I said, well, I'm going to head out, and I'm going to see if this guy will show up. And of course, I'm back there, sitting there waiting. And it's like 2 hours go by, nothing. Then a couple of does come up and they scratch around for a minute and then they leave. I'm like, all right, cool. So, I'm playing, it's like this, almost like a Minesweeper game or whatever on my phone. I'm just like, Jesus, this is terrible. I was passing time, it was like perfect weather. It's not too hot, not too cold. I'm just like, it's way comfortable. And I was doing everything I could not just fall asleep. And the sun's going down. And I'm like, man, I'm running out of time. So I checked my clock, and it's like 5:10. I was like, all right, this is probably when he's going to show up, is right at sundown.
What weapon are you hunting with?
At this point, I'm hunting with a crossbow.
So
I'm still not comfy, and I wasn't going to use a rifle back there. So I'm like, well, paid for it, might as well use it.
Yeah.
So got the crossbow back there, and I zeroed this thing at 45, so I know if it's standing underneath the feeder and any line straight out from there, I mean, it's point of aim, point of impact.
Yeah, you're golden.
Yeah. And then you just adjust the pin height, and just like archery with the bow, at that point, you're just shooting pin gaps. So I knew I was good to go there. And I'm scanning about every 5 minutes. And I think it was 5:15 is when I checked again, and I see this thing in the tree line. And I went past him first, and I came back, and I see him, and it was this big, majestic looking, super tall 5.5-year-old that I had hardly ever seen all year. This is the first time I'd ever seen that deer in person.
Yeah.
And I see him, and I was like, instantly, I swear that deer was going to be able to hear my heart pounding.
It all changed right then and there.
And, you know, I mean, if you were sitting with me in there, you would have thought, man, this dude's just like ice cold right now. No, I was a wreck. I was a train wreck inside because this, I mean, so I'm seeing this thing and he's like, and I was like, all right, chill out. He's at 90 yards. You're not going to shoot him. Just relax. You know, I was like talking to myself almost. So I finally chill a little bit and I'm just watching him. I'm tracking him with the optic and everything. And he kind of meanders off and goes behind a pine tree and some vines and crap like that. So yeah, I lose sight of him. Okay, well, that's not necessarily abnormal. He's cagey anyway. And then I see the 8-pointer that I'm saving. He shows up like a ghost out of the, you know, Children of the Corn movie. And then the 6-pointer shows up, and then this 4-pointer shows up, and I was like, what are we doing here? Like, they all went back to bachelor groups mid-December.
Yeah.
It was weird.
Yeah.
So I've got this huge bachelor group with like multiple generations coming in, and they're all just very slow and meandering and just like, you know, zigzagging their way in. Okay, cool. Well, now I don't see the one I'm going to shoot, so now my heart rate's back down. So I had the adrenaline dump and then the adrenaline crash. As soon as the adrenaline crash and I got chilled out because I saw the other 3, dude comes back in frame. Same thing. Spike. You know? So, and he's doing this to me, and I would like to think that he knew I was there and he was doing it on purpose. Because he made me work for it mentally.
Yeah.
Because he zigzagged his way in, and it took him 18 minutes to cover, 35 yards to get in range? Because I trusted it out to about 50, 55, but nothing really past that.
Yeah.
So as soon as he crossed the trail cam on the other side, I was like, okay, cool, he's in range now. Now it's time to get serious. So I started locking in, and now I was just waiting for the shot. And that, again, proves more difficult than you would like to admit, because you almost second guess yourself too much on that. It's like, okay, well, is he in the right? What if he jumps? Do I aim lower? And then, you know, all these things start, you know, all these conversations you've had over the last year start creeping up into your head. And it was like, just shut up and shoot.
Yeah.
So where his elbow was, he was kind of quartering toward me a little bit. But where his elbow was, I shot right above and just in front of, or just to the right of it.
Yeah.
So I was still in that little hook box back there behind his shoulder blade and everything. But I shot that one, and the feeling that I had when I watched that bolt take off, it was like slow motion.
Yep.
Because I was so nervous about having a repeat performance from October. And so I see this green this time fly in, and I'm like, just stay on course. Don't go right. Because if it went right, I would have missed him completely. You know, but different weapon system, but it's still the same concern, you know, irrational fear. So this thing, and then it just disappears right above his elbow. And all that adrenaline just crashed again. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to throw up. So, and that's literally what because I didn't know where you were at the time. So I had called Brooke and I was like, hey, I just got the big one and I'm about ready to throw up. So,
She had told me, she was like, Mike just called me. He sounds pretty worked up. I was like, he got a deer, didn't he?
Yep, sure did. So I got him, and, you know, it was like I said, I mean, 18 minutes of having elevated everything.
Yeah.
And then you see the shot that you want, and, you know, you finally put the mental work in. You know, everything else before that's physical work, you know, throwing corn and, you know, doing that site improvement and moving equipment, practice, all that stuff's physical. That you cannot practice that mental part.
Yeah.
No matter what you do. And, you know, even like last year, you know, it's like, oh, I tried to apply everything from the Army to this. Well, it's not the same, you know, because I don't know. It's just completely different. I don't really know how to describe it,
It's
other
its own
than
thing.
Yeah, it's when that happened and everything just crashed all at once. I was like, oh, okay, got him. probably going to puke now. So I kind of got my bearings and I was like, okay, cool. So I went out there, checked for blood, because I had a secondary mission on this too. And I felt like I had been cheating my dogs out of this exercise all year long, but I finally had the chance to do it.
Yeah.
So I got out there, saw the blood trail, and it was perfect. So I'm like, cool. So I backed out, grabbed the four-wheeler, zipped back to the house, grabbed the bigger of the two dum-dums, and threw his vest on. And he was not really well versed in riding in a side-by-side. It was a 115-pound dog that didn't know how to sit. So that was a trip in and of itself, but he knew something was up, because as soon as I walked in the house, he knew there was a difference in my demeanor.
Yeah.
And he posted up right in front of me. He sat and his tail was stock still, which never happens with that dog. He was completely locked onto me. He knew it was game time before I said anything.
Yeah.
So hooked him up with his vest and everything, and we got him out back, and I'm trying to tether him to my belt because I didn't trust him off leash, because this is the first time we'd ever done it. So I didn't know what he was going to do, if he's going to go try and eat the deer when he found it or what. But so I'm trying to tether him to my belt, and he's already on the blood trail. I didn't give him a single command. He takes this blood trail, and I was like, all right, fine, you know what to do, let's go. So he takes off. If I would have let him off leash, he would have found that deer in less than a minute.
I bet.
It was probably 35-ish yards, 40 yards to the fence line, and the deer got to the fence and then turned right and followed the fence for about 10 yards and laid down. So I spot checked the dog a couple of times following this blood trail, which is a good thing that I had him, because I would have had to do it by flashlight, because at that point in time,
yeah.
I mean, I got him right before the sun went down. So I probably had 15 minutes of shootable light left after I put the bolt in him.
Yeah.
So it was dark, and he was on it, and I would stop about every 10 yards, and I'd hit the flashlight just to see if he was on it, and he was literally right on top of blood drops the whole time. Followed it right down there, got to the fence, hooked left, didn't have a scent, turned right back around, went right, stopped, and he pointed. This is not a pointer dog.
Yeah.
And he stopped, and his tail went straight back, and he just pointed. He looked right at it. And I was like, all right, good job, buddy.
That's what you want.
So, yeah, I mean, granted, it wasn't the hardest trail to follow, but
Well, that's where you start them off, like you
Yeah.
said. So
I was super impressed with how he performed. And then, as deer oftentimes do, they expire downhill. So that was super fun.
yep, another uphill
Yeah.
drag.
Yep. And not a small one. So, but at least it wasn't a 10-foot, washout that I
Yeah.
had to throw him up over.
No, man, that buck that's an outstanding buck, because you had already called us and told us what was going on. So when we got home that evening, you'd already had him field dressed by the time we got home. But after we got home and I got everything situated at the house, I came over and took a look at him and everything, hung out for a little bit, and yeah, he's absolute stud of a buck, especially for a backyard buck, man.
Yeah, and he's unique too. He wasn't the standard like that 10 was last year. The 10 was pretty standard, good looking dude.
Oh,
but
he had character. He
Yeah.
had mass. He's a good deer.
big neck. I think his what I cut off of his neck I think they were about 4.5 pounds each
Wow.
off of each side. So he had a fat neck. So, but yeah, I was super happy with that one, and that was it. I was like, all right, cool. I'm done for the year. So, also, archery's expensive, dude. Why didn't you tell me?
You had already bought a bow when I
My
met you.
God.
Just saying.
This is just getting ridiculous. So, yeah, let's see. I had lost 2 arrows the first time because the one broke, and the other one, well, I didn't lose 2 arrows, but I had to fix the broadhead on the second arrow that I put into him. So, I think I probably lost about $18-20 on that one. And then we're not going to talk about Carrie's deer. That one was really expensive. The one that I got in December, he was a 1 bolt, but I don't know if this is common. He broke that bolt in 2 spots.
Really?
Because it went in and it punched out on the exit wound, but it didn't pass through. So this bolt was diagonal across both lungs, just above the heart, and it stayed there the whole time he ran.
Wow.
So his shoulder blades and bones running back and forth, he snapped that bolt on both ends.
Wow. That's pretty unique.
And the broadhead ended up falling off, and I never found that, so awesome. So I'm out a bolt, a broadhead, and I think the lighted knock works yet, but I'm not real sure. So yeah, that cost me like a cool $40 there.
Yeah. The arrows will get you for sure. I've been rocking the same arrow build for about 8 years now. And so, you know, every couple years I got to go in and get a new batch made. And I remember one of these years I went in to my normal guy that I go to and been working with him for forever. He knows me well. He knows what I shoot. And I told him ahead of time, hey, I'm coming in. I need some new arrows. And like I normally build them myself and everything, but I told him like, hey, can you make sure you got some in stock, or if you don't, order them and I'll be in when they get there. He's like, yeah, cool, I got you. So I show up and Easton has, you know, the normal Easton Axis shaft, and then they have the Match Pro grade, which is just the normal Easton Axis shaft is a .003 straightness. The Match Pro grade is a .001. So it's the straightest. Like .003 is industry standard,
Right.
but a .001 is like the best that you're gonna get. And I didn't even think twice to look at the box, but the box that he handed me were the Match Pro grades. So we go to check out, and I mean he still hooks me up, but he's bringing me up, and I'm like, how much? What'd you say?
Yeah, this hurts a little.
And he told me, he's like, well, those are the Match Pro grades. I was like, I didn't ask for that. And he said, well, I figured you just want the best of the best. I was like, well, next time I don't want the best of the best. I'll take industry standard. I'm still a blue collar broke guy over here.
Now I gotta explain this.
Yeah, exactly. We had a budget and we just blew it.
Right.
No.
So, and which is all fine and great until you break one of them.
Yeah.
That's where you start crying.
Yeah.
And that's where I was at out there. It's like every time I shot something, I busted a bolt or a shaft, and I'm like, dude, rifle rounds are way cheaper.
Yeah, it's the reusable factor that makes it, you know, enjoyable. But if you can't reuse them, then there goes that. So,
but I mean, to be perfectly honest, with the money that I have to spend to hunt, which is not a lot, I can sacrifice an arrow and not cry over spilled milk.
right.
You know, I mean, whereas like last year, if I was out there and busting arrows every time I put something down, after paying the insane amount that lease cost, which, I mean, that was a godsend actually getting rid of that lease. You know, just with everything going on, that would have been a catastrophic waste of money this year. But as it turns out, there was more things going on this year, and it's just not. It wouldn't have been a good situation.
That's a story in and of itself.
Yeah. It just to keep it simple, it would not have been a good situation this year to be out there. So, glad that kind of dissipated and evaporated and everything. But I mean, with that lease, you know, that whole experience, you know, a good friend ended up moving to Colorado. So, you know, I only see him like once a year now, whereas like it was every weekend last year. So, but at any rate, this, the whole breaking things. I mean, yeah, I get it. Pass-throughs are sweet, but I have yet to get one. Sure would like to have one. Haven't yet.
Yeah.
And I'm reasonably certain that I will not get a pass-through on a wild pig.
It's pretty tough.
Yeah, a little bit tougher on the hide factor there. And if I'm not getting a pass through on a deer, I'm not going to get one on a wild pig.
I did not expect to get one on that bruiser that I shot last year, and I did. It was just an ideal shot situation is what it was. But even then, I was expecting to see my arrow sticking out when he ran off and zipped right through. But no shoulder blade, only vitals. So
see,
that was the difference maker right there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you're not, I mean, like with rifle shots and stuff, we don't really care about the angle on a pig. we know we're going to hit something. And especially with what I'm shooting, when I shoot a 50 Beowulf, it's going through a cinder block, so I'm not real worried about the shield on the chest of a pig. So
Right. So have you picked your bow back up?
I mean, I've shot stuff. So it was after one of those, like, I don't know, it was like November, early December or something. And I was out there and sat there and looked at grass for 3 hours and then came back in. And then the deer showed up after I left.
Yeah.
It's pretty sweet. So it was after one of those nights where I was just frustrated, so I set the target up 25 yards out from the freezers in the garage. And I was just shooting arrows, just lobbing arrows out of the garage into the target, just grouping.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's still putting a tight group in and everything, but it's like, I don't know. For me to get comfortable with it, I think I'm going to have to go hog hunting with the bow. And I'm going to have to do it with the bow, not a rifle. And then that'll kind of bring that confidence back. It's not an ability issue. I know I have the ability to do it. But at this point, it's just the confidence, because it seems like, like last year with the one that I took with the bow out there at the lease, that was a shot I had no business taking. I'll say that till the day I die. I had no business taking that shot. Somehow sunk it in there, and that was purely accidental, but it worked. And then this year, like, I think I know what I'm doing, and then I have some kind of a weird fail, and, I do something that I never wanted to do, and now I'm gun shy on it.
Yeah.
So, the crossbow was cool because it was kind of the, I didn't want to use it, but, I mean, let's face it, my body's worn out. I've only got like 3 or 4 years of bow hunting in me at best, and then my shoulders are going to be worn out anyway. So this is one of those age things. So, but that's fine. You play hard when you're young, and you end up paying for it when you're 45, 50 years old. So I'm nearing that number. So yeah, I'll end up putting that bow up and probably just saving it for the kid when she gets comfortable with hers, which, I mean, she's obviously comfortable with it. You saw her shoot that one, and she was like, all right, cool. Well, all right, I'm going back in now. Yeah. It's not like it's a novelty. She's very comfortable with it, and she can test fire it and be like, yeah, that's what I want. All right, see ya.
Yeah. I will say shooting paper, shooting dots, it's way different than shooting a live animal. For any novice archers out there who are just now getting into it, it is way different. And it's one thing if you're shooting target. I had a guy out of my place, friend of mine named Josh. He came out a few weeks ago, new to bow hunting, has his first bow, picking my brain on a lot of stuff, and that was one thing that came up, was shooting live animals versus shooting dots.
Yeah.
What do you shoot in practice? And I know you start out shooting paper normally, and then that makes it more difficult for live animal, but then you go and you shoot like 3D targets, 3D archery, even paper targets of actual animals where you're not aiming at a dot, you're aiming at
an area,
a spot, a location. And with that location, there's a little bit more room for error. We as archers tend to judge ourselves a lot if we are, an inch or a couple inches outside that dot. Now, do we want to be accurate enough to be in that dot every time? Absolutely we do, and that's the goal. But your confidence is built stronger if you're shooting and like you shoot at a 3D target, for example, and your shots up and down's good, but you're 2 inches to the right, but you're looking at the target and you're like, that would still kill that animal.
Right.
That helps your confidence, even if you don't consciously realize it. But then what I have found, and I'll speak from my own personal experience with this, you shoot 3D and then you go back to shooting paper, and now you have target panic because now you're staring at a dot again. I've been there. That's what happened to me. And so what did I do then? I'm getting ready to shoot indoor state that year, so I started practicing indoor again. I started shooting dots again. Worried that I was going to lose my touch on a real animal because I had just transitioned from dots to real animal to build my confidence, and now I'm worried I'm going to lose my confidence because I'm trying to gain confidence in a different area now.
Right.
But it actually helped me more than I realized it, because the confidence didn't go away. The confidence maintained, and I learned how to beat target panic, is what I learned. And then when I went back to shooting both, and ever since then I try to keep a healthy mixture of both. But when I went back and forth as I matured as an archer, well, now I know how to beat my target panic. Now I know my weaknesses as an archer. Now I have confidence in shooting actual animals. And that's the other thing, is that you get confidence shooting actual animals by shooting actual animals.
Right.
That's, to your point, go out there and shoot a bunch of pigs with your bow, and next deer season rolls around, you'd be like, I've been there, done this.
Be a little bit elevated still because it's a deer, not a pig, but it's not going to be as pronounced as it was when, Gigantors showed up.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an awful 18 minutes. It was so bad. It was so bad.
You experienced it. First little taste of it.
But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. I mean, I still want to continue on with the bow, but I know eventually I'm going to have to put that up, and it's going to be a crossbow thing. Just I mean, I'm already supposed to have had resections on both shoulders for the collarbones, so it's a matter of time.
Yeah. Year 1 to year 2, looking at it in the rear view now, what would you have done differently?
I don't really think there was anything that I could have done differently given the situation on everything. I think, I mean, hindsight being 2020, I would have talked to the neighbor from jump and just set up back there, and not even worried about my backyard.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I have 15 acres, but if I can, do predator and varmint control and everything, and offload some meat to them, in exchange for the access, then I'd have just done that from start.
Yeah.
So that's really the big thing, because it seemed like where I was set up, I mean, just from the look of it, yes, it was a great spot. It was very protected yet open, and there were good shooting lanes, especially with a little bit of work. But it was too close to the houses.
Yeah.
So, and there was just enough noise, and you got a few dogs running through there every now and then.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful when your big ones are showing up, and whether you're going to shoot them or not. I mean, when you're out there in the blind and then a dog shows up and scares them off, it's like, all right, that's frustrating.
Yeah.
So yeah, moving it back there, that was great, because that's where all the critters are. I mean, there's massive coyotes running around back there. Somebody will have to prove me wrong on them, because I swear there's a bobcat out there, because I've heard it in the middle of the night, and that's a very distinctive sound.
I believe it.
So there's bobcats back there. I've got foxes. Let's see, sandhill cranes on camera.
No kidding. No kidding.
Yeah, there's the whole shebang is all back there within 100 yards of where my ground blind is.
That's awesome.
So
it's a good spot.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's just timing. But there's I do have a friend of mine that she's got a bucket list, and one of the things on her bucket list is to go pig hunting. So
come on.
That's what I told her. I was like, okay, we'll make it work. I'm going to keep an eye on the wind, and the first chance we get when the wind is right, we'll be out there. I said, oh, by the way, I'm recording all of it. She's like, why? And I said, have you met my neighbor?
Oh, boy.
I said, you just stumbled your way into hog wars, which I'm bound and determined to actually get something going on that.
Yeah, for sure.
So
pretty awesome. All right. Well, man, before we wrap it up, for those that may not have caught it in the podcast video, I wanted to bring attention to your little table pieces here that you brought over.
I did not make these. I'm good, but I'm not that good.
It's pretty sweet. I'll lean closer to the camera for the video, but it's a glass American flag on it, and it's got a broadhead in the side of it. Like when they molded the glass itself, they stuck that thing in there. That's pretty
Figured
sick.
It was an appropriate table piece.
Yeah, I like that. It's pretty cool. Well, man, thanks for joining me. Another podcast. I'm sure it won't be long before we come up with something else to talk about on here. But
there's all kinds of stupid stuff we can do.
For sure. No, I enjoy getting to hang out with you on here and talk some hunting. Appreciate you recapping your season, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, so. More ugly than anything, but you got to have it. I mean, I'm not even worried about it, because it was bound to happen eventually.
Yeah.
You can't just you're not always going to have a good year.
No, you're not, and you learn from the bad ones. And I know not to I've talked about my season already on our show, and not to revisit that, but I certainly, with the exception of my Colorado trip, my Colorado trip was great, but my Texas hunting has been very underwhelming this year, and not at all what I expected. And but at the same time, I've learned a lot, and it's just going to make you better for next year. So
exactly, and plenty of time to do it now, and
Yeah.
hopefully, with El Nino in town, we'll actually have some good weather this year, and it won't be quite as hot, and we can get a little more outside time.
Yeah, hopefully.
So, yeah, appreciate you having me again.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, if you're listening, thank you. Appreciate y'all tuning into another Fall Obsession podcast. You know the drill. All the social platforms, go hit them up. Fall Obsession. We post daily, as well as on our YouTube channel. Got tons of cool videos on there. Go subscribe, and whatever platform you're listening to the show on, be sure that you hit that subscribe button as well. That way you know whenever we drop a new episode. We come out with a new one every Monday morning. So be sure that you tune in next week. Thank you all for listening. We're back again then next week, and I will catch you guys then.